Have you ever held a coin in your hand and wondered if it carries more than just its face value? The Jefferson Nickel from 1983 is one of those coins that goes far beyond being just a piece of everyday pocket change. It is a coin with layers of history, economic struggles, production changes, minting techniques, and collector intrigue, all wrapped into one small but powerful 5-cent piece. And here at Old Quarters Dollar Value, we are not just talking about coins. We are talking about the stories of America etched in metal, and the Jefferson Nickel of 1983 is a perfect example of how a coin that many people once ignored became a subject of fascination for collectors, historians, and economists alike. When we look at the Jefferson Nickel series, we are diving into a coin that first came into circulation in 1938. Replacing the buffalo nickel and becoming a symbol of the legacy of Thomas Jefferson, one of America's founding fathers and the third president of the United States. The design, created by Felix Schlag, carried Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and Monticello, his Virginia home, on the reverse, a design that stood for decades with only subtle modifications, and in 1983 this same design carried on, but the story behind that year's coin is not as simple as you might think. The year 1983 was a challenging time in America. It was the beginning of a slow recovery from the deep recession of the early 1980s. Inflation, unemployment, and rising federal debt were shaping economic policy under President Ronald Reagan. And as the economy struggled, so did the United States Mint. Coins are never just pieces of metal. They are products of history and economics. And the 1983 Jefferson Nickel is a testament to that fact. Unlike coins from other years, the 1983 nickels carry an aura of scarcity and interest that makes them unique. Because of the events surrounding the minting of US coinage in the early 1980s, snow, let's take a closer look at why 1983 was such a fascinating year for nickels. One of the most important reasons is that during this time, the mint was battling issues of coin hoarding, coin shortages, and metallic costs that had shifted dramatically since the 1960s, when silver was removed from dimes, quarters, and half dollars. In 1965, the nickel remained a 5-cent coin made of 75% copper and 25% nickel. But by the 1980s, rising costs of copper and nickel meant that production costs were beginning to weigh heavily on the mint. Yet the government chose to keep the traditional composition and strike millions of Jefferson nickels, as they had for decades. However, the real intrigue with 1983 nickels is tied to their scarcity in higher grades. For many collectors, the 1983 Jefferson Nickel stands out because it was one of the years in which the US Mint did not release traditional mint sets to the public due to budgetary concerns and a lack of collector interest. The result is that high-quality examples from this year, especially with full steps on Monticello, are incredibly difficult to find when mint sets are not issued. That means collectors must rely solely on circulation strikes or proof coins, and in the case of 1983, proof coins were struck only at the San Francisco Mint, bearing the S Mint mark, but circulation strikes from Philadelphia and Denver had to survive the wear and tear of everyday commerce before collectors could identify them, making gem examples much more rare than in other years. This is why collectors today prize the 1983 Jefferson Nickel, especially those from the Philadelphia Mint, with strong strikes and full steps on Monticello. The steps are a key detail on the coin because they represent the level of sharpness in the strike. When all the steps are visible without major interruptions, it is a sign of precision and rarity. And 1983 was a year where striking quality was notoriously inconsistent, meaning that full step examples are some of the hardest to locate in the entire Jefferson Nickel series. And that is why coin grading companies like PCGs and NGC often assign significant premiums to high-grade 1983 Jefferson nickels, especially with the full steps designation. But the story does not end there. To understand the 1983 Jefferson Nickel fully, we must place it in the broader context of US coinage. During this time, the mint was operating under pressure to modernize coinage production and streamline costs, while also meeting the needs of an economy that demanded billions of circulating coins every year. Philadelphia and Denver struck hundreds of millions of nickels in 1983, yet few of them survive in pristine condition. This is because most were shipped directly into circulation with no regard for collector quality. In fact, rolls and bags of 1983 nickels were heavily used in daily transactions, and most examples show nicks scratches, dull luster, or weak strikes, which explains why finding a high-grade survivor is almost like finding a hidden treasure note. If we look deeper into the history of the Jefferson nickel itself, we see that by 1983 it was already a coin with 45 years of tradition, had survived World War II, when the composition had temporarily changed to a wartime alloy of silver, manganese, and copper from 1942 to 1945. In order to save nickel for the war effort, it had survived the inflation of the 1970s, when the purchasing power of the nickel declined dramatically, and it had survived challenges from Congress about whether the 5-cent coin should even continue to exist in its current form. Yet, in 1983, the Jefferson nickel remained steady, unchanged in design, but full of hidden value from a numismatic perspective. The 1983 nickel also teaches us about the psychology of coin collecting. Many collectors ignored these coins when they were first issued, thinking of them as just common modern coinage. But over time, as people began to realize the scarcity of gem examples, they started to become more desirable. This is a pattern we often see in numismatics, where a coin that seems ordinary in its own time later becomes a sleeper rarity that future collectors desperately want. The 1983 Jefferson nickel fits that pattern perfectly, and when we think about values today, the most basic circulated 1983 nickels are still worth face value just 5 cents. But the real value lies in uncirculated and graded examples. A 1983 Jefferson nickel in mint state 65, with full steps, can sell for hundreds of dollars at auction, while superb gem examples can fetch even more. In fact, some of the highest graded full step 1983 nickels have reached into the thousands, showing just how much collectors are willing to pay for rarity, quality, and history all combined into one coin. So, when you look at the 1983 Jefferson nickel, you are not just looking at a piece of base metal. You are looking at a time capsule of American history. You are looking at a coin that reflects the economic struggles of the early 1980s, the minting policies of the United States Mint, the artistry of Felix Schlag's classic design, and the passion of collectors who seek out the rarest, most beautiful survivors from a year when mint sets were absent and circulation coins were the burden of historians. Coin tells a story of resilience, scarcity, and hidden value, and that is exactly why it deserves the attention of collectors today. So the next time you come across a nickel from 1983, do not dismiss it as just pocket change. It could very well be a rare piece of American history that carries within it the spirit of a nation, its economic battles, and its legacy of coinage that continues to inspire generations of numismatists.